Welcome to the Keynon Lake Show on SIBN Radio. Keynon Lake is the author of the book My Daddy Taught Me That, published by Welcome, a social worker and activist. You can like this show's fan page at www.facebook.com/The Keynon Lake Show on SIBN Radio. Feel free to post any comments, questions, or requests for his book on the fan page. Now let's go into the studio with your host, Mr. Keynon Lake, and co-host, Marcus Select.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Keynon Lake Show, live and on demand on SIBN Radio. My name is Marcus Select, and Keynon is in the studio. Keynon, how are you doing today?
Coach, I'm doing wonderful today. You know, we normally do our shows on Sunday, but today is a Tuesday. We had a couple of weather issues on Sunday and some other things that took place, but I am so glad to be here. We have a guest today, Coach, on the show by the name of Nikki McDougall. And, Coach, you know, today's topic is we're going to be focusing on racism and race issues, and it's a wonderful day to talk about that, specifically when, you know, the NBA is dealing with all the stuff that's capturing national news, dealing with racism and the remarks that Mr. Sterling made. So, Nikki, are you there?
Yes, I am. How are you?
Good. So, welcome to the Keynon Lake Show.
Welcome. Welcome.
Go ahead, Coach.
No, I was just saying, welcome, Nikki. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Great. So, Nikki, if you want to tell our listeners exactly what you do and give them a little shout-out about your alma mater, NCCU.
Absolutely. So, like you said, my name is Nikki McDougall. I'm actually from Fayetteville, North Carolina, so I'm North Carolina born and bred. And I attended North Carolina Central University for my undergrad, which is in political science and criminal justice. And then I also went back and I graduated in '07 with my master's in public administration. So I had the opportunity to attend the best historically black college and university in the U.S. I just want to say that.
Yes.
Because a lot of people
want to second that.
Yes, a lot of people may think that their HBCU is the best, but we know the truth as Eagles.
Exactly.
Oh, y'all are crazy.
So what are you doing? What are you doing now, Nikki? Tell them what you got going on now. What are you doing for?
Sure. So I now work as a program associate for community outreach with an organization called the Carolina Justice Policy Center. And we are a nonprofit that was established in 1975. And our mission statement says that we are a nonprofit that is dedicated to developing and promoting effective, equitable, and humane solutions to criminal justice problems. So what all of that really means is that we work with communities, we work with local leaders, and we work with policymakers on finding strategies that best positively help individuals who are transitioning back into society from prison and jails. And then we also try to work on policies that kind of reform what sentencing and what justice looks like in our state as well.
Ooh.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Keynon,
Coach, you know, we don't
wait, Keynon. I should have met her when I was in Asheville just a few weeks ago. That would have been a great interview for your program. Keynon.
Well, see, Coach, she doesn't live in Asheville. She lives down in Durham, down in that area.
Durham, right.
Okay.
So she's a little ways away. But, Coach, you know, let me just say this. You know, us Eagles, you know, she said that we're Eagles. We soar high above the rest. You know, we fly high above the rest, Coach. So, you know, you're on the phone with some good stock here. You know, we got some good stock in the university that we attended.
Okay.
But let's get to the show so we won't keep our audiences waiting and stuff.
Sure.
So, Nikki, I want you to... So, Nikki, let's talk about, you know, a little bit about what you do, but I think, too, you wanted to kind of get a point across today, and I think we're going to just let you go ahead on and start it, and we're going to finish it and join in.
Right. So I want to continue to kind of talk about my organization to kind of bring you into the issues that we're working on and why we're working on those issues. So initially when our organization started, we were faced with the question, you know, what is our role whenever we start talking about criminal justice and whenever we're looking at justice in North Carolina? And I want to make sure I say that we are not a service provider. but we kind of brand ourselves as an informational resource. So if you're looking for data, if you're looking for information on certain programs, if you're looking for information that may have come out in the budget, if you want to see how things have been restructured since we have new leadership in North Carolina, then we can definitely help you locate that information if we do not have that on file. So we kind of work in three main areas initially when we first started, which was community outreach, community corrections, and then sentencing reform. And so in 1976, when the death penalty was reinstated in the U.S., we added the death penalty as our fourth focus area. And so we've really, within the last 7 years, have really focused on the death penalty because since it was reestablished in 1976, there have always been flaws with our death penalty system. And one of those main continuing flaws, reoccurring flaws, has been race. And so what we wanted to do in North Carolina is we wanted to find out how race impacts justice in our state. So we wanted to know if sentences were being actually imposed or seeked because of race. And so in 2009, we worked with legislators in a coalition of organizations across the state of North Carolina, and we helped pass the Racial Justice Act. Now, the purpose of the Racial Justice Act was to ensure that race did not play a role in imposing of the death penalty. And I know there's a lot to kind of take in at one time, so I always tell people to really focus on those two words, seeking and imposing. When we talk about seeking, we're looking at the court's decision whenever they decide that this is a death penalty case, that this case is so heinous that it warrants the only relief of justice, which would be the death penalty. So we look at that whenever we talk about seeking. So whenever we talk about imposing, we're looking at the jury's decision and how they selected that penalty, how they selected that punishment of the death penalty. And so going into this, whenever the Racial Justice Act was passed, we knew that there were going to be some racial disparities, of course, with the race of the defendant, because we know, especially in North Carolina, that African Americans make up between 20 to 26% of the overall population, but we're over 60% of the incarcerated population. So we knew that we were going to be facing some disparities there. But what we did not anticipate whenever we looked at the Racial Justice Act was the vast disparity in the racial composition of the jury. And so we wanted to know why this was such an issue and why there was this major disparity in how juries were selected in our state. So Michigan State University came in and they did a very, very comprehensive study. And so they looked at in their study, they looked at 7,421 jurors between the time period of 1990 and 2010. And so what they looked at is what's called peremptory strikes or peremptory challenges. And whenever you are in a death penalty case, the defense attorneys and also the district attorneys, they both have what they call peremptory strikes. And during this time, if there is a juror that you do not think can make a fair or impartial decision whenever it comes to rendering a verdict or rendering the punishment in that case, then you can strike that person from being a part of that jury. And so what this study found was that qualified African-American jurors who wanted to serve on capital case juries were 2.6 times more likely to be struck from serving on the jury.
Mm-hmm.
So Nikki, let me stop you real quick, and
sure.
let me pick this up. So this is something that, I think Coach and I have done, some shows not quite to the extent with the information that you're giving us, particularly here in the state of North Carolina. But, this sounds like, this whole system that we talk about all the time, Coach, where, the system, how we talk about the system is set up and it's geared towards a certain race and gender.
It is.
And with that, we talked about the privatization of prison. In fact, we talked about judges being paid, or bought off. There was actually a judge, I don't want to say his name, it started with a C, but, we talked about how this was about 34 years ago. He was found taking money and taking bribes for locking up young African-American males.
Right.
In fact, I just read a study today, and it said, according to according to the researchers in Michigan and Pennsylvania, it said more than 4% of inmates sentenced to death row in the U.S. are found innocent.
Mm-hmm.
That is very true.
This is something I just read today. So it seems like, this whole epidemic is wired. Even, Coach, like I said, we talk about the system, but it's even structured more into that systematic approach of eliminating certain areas, certain races, certain people.
That's right. And, you hit on one thing when you talked about systematic. And when you talk about systematic, that's it. That's really where it comes from, because we wanted to know the history of selecting juries and jury diversity in our country. And so we saw our first efforts to actually combat racial bias and race discrimination in jury selection with the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1875. Mm-hmm. And so it was in this act that the law strictly prohibited the exclusion of African Americans from jury service. Mm-hmm. And in this law, it stated something like, all people of high intelligence and good moral character should be allowed to serve. So ultimately, this translated into white men. Mm-hmm. That's what this translated into, and it remained this way for decades, and there was no one in the lower court to challenge this and say, hey, listen, this isn't right, this isn't wrong, this is absolutely wrong. And so, you have this history, and we're moving into the civil rights era, and you have people that are really fighting and really pushing for equality in everything, to voting, to housing, to education. And the idea of having African Americans to be a part of the judicial system kind of wanes away. It's no longer important.
Well, I wanted you to go back, Nikki, to a very, very crucial point, because the listener is trying to follow along, and you and Keynon are working in not only social services in some respects, but also the information thereof for social service, social justice, so forth and so on. But I think you're making a valid point about how African Americans are not able, talking about the citizens that are intelligent and fit the description that you just described, how they are not able to serve on the jury. I wanted you to finish that point so that the listener can put the pieces together. You can't have justice for African Americans and brown folks of all races or colors without the possibility of an increase of minority representation on jury selection. So I want you to finish that point to show how statistically or principally African Americans were excluded until X, Y, and Z. Can you finish that point for me?
Sure, absolutely. And so when I was making that point, one thing that I like to talk about is, and Keynon hit it, I keep having to go back to whenever he talked about systematic and systemic problems within the system. Mm-hmm. I like to use the example, when we walk in a courtroom, it is completely acceptable to see a white defense attorney, a white district attorney, a white judge, white sheriff deputies or bailiffs in your courtroom, and an all-white jury. It's absolutely okay. However, if you walked into the courtroom and you saw an African-American judge and you saw an African-American defense attorney and an African-American district attorney and you saw an African-American jury and bailiffs, what would be wrong with that picture? That in itself should make people think.
Right. I've never seen it.
And the thing is, what we want most from our jury selection process is we want it to reflect the communities that it serves. We some of us may live in communities that are 100% African American. However, our state isn't 100% African American. Our cities aren't 100% African American, but that is what's happening in our courtrooms. We are seeing that these African Americans are actually being excluded. And I want to really talk about some of the reasons that have been given. A couple of years ago in North Carolina, the Conference of District Attorneys actually held a training. And in this training, they talked about Batson justifications. And let me back up and talk a little bit about what Batson is. So I talked about how African Americans were being excluded, and we talked about the Civil Rights Act of 1875, and it was supposed to make these great changes, and this was a very, very important time in African American history, because between 1865 and 1876, this was the Reconstruction period. So you had African Americans who were being elected to Congress, elected and appointed to Congress during this time. So this was a very, very important time in African American history. And when we reflect on our history, we usually just talk about the Civil Rights era. But there were a lot of things that were going on during this Reconstruction period, and the Civil Rights Act of 1875 was one of the great things to come out of it. Mm-hmm. Well, after that time, you're looking at the Civil Rights period, and during the Civil Rights period and a little thereafter, every decade there is this big thing in criminal justice. And I believe it's probably like that in every social justice issue. And so in the 1980s, we had what? We had the war on drugs, right?
Right.
Well, what was happening was you had these attorneys that were going into court, and they were losing. Mm-hmm. They were losing these cases. Mm-hmm. And they were saying, wait a minute, one of the reasons why we're losing these cases is because the juries don't understand my defendant. Mm-hmm. They don't look like my defendant, and there's no effort to make sure that there is any equality or diversity in the jury selection pool. Mm-hmm. And so what happened was in 1986, there was a court case that went before the U.S. Supreme Court. And that case was Batson versus Kentucky. Mm-hmm. And in this case, the defendant said, hey, listen, there's no reason why people like me should not have an opportunity to serve on my jury. And if they are excluded from serving on my jury, then my attorney, whether it is defense attorney or whether it is the state, because the state can raise this issue as well, mm-hmm. they ought to be able to challenge why a minority is being removed from my jury if they believe that this person is being removed based on their race. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so Batson actually won. This case won in 1986. Now, mind you, the very first legislation that was passed was in 1875. Mm-hmm. So it took all of this time for us to get to this Batson ruling that would say, look, this is still unacceptable, even though it's still happening in our court system.
Let me ask you this: was the Racial Justice Act repealed in North Carolina, or is it back? Is it law, or was it repealed?
No, it was actually repealed, okay. And it was repealed in 2013. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons why it was repealed is because it did something. It went a step further than the Batson ruling. And what the Batson ruling didn't do is it said, okay, once you have this person that has been excluded from jury service, you can challenge this in front of the trial judge. The trial judge can make a decision. That's it. Mm-hmm. But this is only during trial. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. If you want to raise an issue or a racial discrimination or racial bias issue in your case after trial, right. There was nothing in place. There was no law that said you can do that. You could raise it, but there was nothing that said the court had to hear it or entertain it. Mm-hmm. So that is why the Racial Justice Act was so important, because it said, listen, if this defendant raises this issue, raises this claim, then the court has to pay attention to it and they have to rule on it. Now, the thing about this is a lot of the opposition to the Racial Justice Act said that this would allow the defendant who committed this heinous crime to get off. That's not what the law does. What the law does is it says, listen, you are guilty. Mm-hmm. You did this crime. You're going to be punished for what you did. Mm-hmm. So what we're going to do is we're going to say you're no longer on death row, but you get life without the possibility of parole.
And the opportunity, should you choose so, during your time in prison, as we know that the inmates did when before the law was repealed, inmates collaborated with attorneys outside to ensure that in some cases, or in many cases, justice was served on a fair plate, if you will.
That's right.
And that doesn't fare well to the systematic problem of racism at all. When an inmate, someone's guilty,
right?
So Keynon.
Let me add this too, and Nikki. And when we come back from our commercial here, I would like you to add this, but. I think everyone, for the most part, not everyone, but I think a large majority of society knows that, the system is not fair. When you look at, you talked about the war on drugs. Well, you talk about that, and that whole era was designed to trap and kind of, put aside a whole generation. And then you look at the number of people who are incarcerated, on the war on drugs. The majority of them are nonviolent criminals.
That's right.
So, it's like, you have all these nonviolent criminals, who receive this outrageous, time in prison. You receive all these years in prison, for a drug charge, and you've never had any prior violent criminal activity in your life. So,
that's right.
and that can also be looked at as, a form of racism. But I guess the question that I want to ask is, where do we go from here? I think that's something that has always been, on the forefront and on the
Sure.
the front burners. But where do we go, and how do we start, I guess, kind of reprimanding or either, healing the healing process or making change is what I want to
Right.
ask. And I guess I'll let you answer that when we come back from our
And I
commercial
want her to answer that, but let me say this to the listener. What is significantly important at this point is to be educated. And we cannot do much more about changing anything systematically speaking unless we understand the system. So I think it's interesting
There you go.
that Keynon, you're pointing out the racism that is existing today, but you are also bringing people on the show who can thread it back. They can show you the quilt, the making of, and the continuation of the perpetuation of racism through systematic institutions right under our noses that we, as Keynon, you said in another show, well, we didn't go out to vote last primary season. We didn't go out to vote for, the congressman in our district. We didn't go out to, I'm talking about last season, right? And as you said, in 2013, this was repealed. And I just want to say, just speculating, that if our folks would turn up at the polls when progressive moves like this Racial Justice Act would come about in North Carolina or in other states, North Carolina being the first, perhaps it would have never been repealed. I don't know. But I'm just saying, you can't change what you don't know much about. And so I appreciate Miss Nikki bringing to the table a unique view, because most people are convicted by juries. We'll be right back. This is SIBN Radio.
Now is the time. Now is the time. Your radio show on SIBN Radio. You're ready to share your message with the world. Then call 404-910-5019. That's right, call 404-910-5019. Producing your radio show on SIBN Radio. For more information, dial 404-910-5019. That's right. 404-910-5019. Now is the time. Responsible. Accountable. Who taught you that? My daddy taught me that. That's right, the new book, all the way from Asheville, North Carolina, representing the legacy of Benny Lake, is Keynon Lake, the author of My Daddy Taught Me That, the book and the program for young men in Asheville, North Carolina, and throughout the region. Tune in to the program, the project, and the book at MyDaddyTaughtMeThat.com. For more information, email lake@MyDaddyTaughtMeThat.com. or call 828-582-2261. That's 828-582-2261. MyDaddyTaughtMeThat.com.
Thank you for joining us for the Keynon Lake Show right here on SIBN Radio. As we think about our children or our children's children that may get in trouble with the law, become incarcerated, we also want to think about, as an American citizen, that they have a right to a fair trial. This is probably one of the systematic questions that we could put on the table, and Miss Nikki is bringing out something that perhaps many listeners have not thought about, and that is the process of jury selection as it pertains to African Americans being a part of that jury, as being part of the peer group that this defendant, hailing from the streets or the hood, supposedly represents. And we're finding, according to Miss Nikki, that the representation, as many of you know, is absolutely, oh my goodness, pitiful. So Keynon asked the question right before the break, what do we do now? And Miss Nikki, you got the floor.
Okay, so I'm really glad that you asked that question, and I'm also happy that you brought up about elections, because what we tend to do as communities is we do not think about our district attorneys as elected officials. When we have a problem, we believe that we're supposed to contact our legislators. We're supposed to contact our senators or our representatives, but we too elect and put in office our district attorneys. And so what my organization is doing is we are encouraging communities across the state of North Carolina, if you know that you're a DA, or even if your DA is not up for re-election, to either have a candidate forum, invite him or her to that candidate forum. There are questions that you can put before them and ask them, what system do you have in place to ensure that racial bias does not play a role in how you select your juries? Are there standard questions that you ask everyone? Are there questions that you have that may only be asked to one group and not to another? Because I was going to make the point before that there was actually a training that was held with the Conference of DAs in North Carolina a few years ago. And when I talked about Batson, I wanted to get to the point that when in the Batson ruling it said that you could not dismiss a juror based on their race. Well, what the Conference of DAs training said was, what we want to do is give you Batson justifications, and so that you can articulate juror negatives that will not seem as if you are actually dismissing a person because of their race. And some of the reasons that we're giving, which would be a justifiable reason for excluding an African American or a person of color from a jury, is because they are inappropriately dressed. Attire may show lack of respect for the system, or immaturity, or rebellion. That was one of the reasons. Another one was physical appearance. Tattoos or hairstyle. Disheveled appearance may mean resistance to authority. Another one was attitude, air of defiance, lack of eye contact with prosecutor, eye contact with the defendant or defense attorney. And so we even took it a little further, and we looked at some of the notes that were actually a part of the prosecutor's thoughts as they're going through this, and they're making notes about certain jurors. And some of the reasons that were listed beside juror names was because this particular juror attended Shaw University. Shaw University is a historically black college university, and Keynon and I talked very early on at the beginning of the show about our pride. Coming from a historically black college university, I paid over $30,000 for my education. I believe, not just with that price tag alone, but what I gained from that experience and the education and my degrees along with that says that I am more than qualified to make an impartial decision whether someone should live or die based on the actions in a crime or a case or whatever. So these are some of the reasons that African Americans are not being allowed to serve. And we're not talking about African Americans that don't want to serve or that have some extenuating circumstances that they can't serve, but these are individuals who say, listen, I want to be a part of this process. Well, and I am not able to do that.
Well, also, but I would think that by default, if the proper balance of power was in place, that the pool in and of itself, the jury pooling or the pooling of jury folks would be more balanced. I mean, the pooling in and of itself is set on autopilot by default to delete blacks and African Americans, minorities of intelligence and beyond and beyond. So I think what Keynon was trying to bring to the show about racism and what he's bringing to the show about My Daddy Taught Me That is, listen, it seems to me, and now correct me, Keynon, it seems to me that by default in many cases, because we can't or we have not challenged these systematic racist problems, by default, we're excluded quietly, institutionally, economically, and on and on and on, politically, and on and on and on. And so I think that what the listeners should take away from this, Keynon, back to your question about what do we do now. First, I hate to say this, but we have to educate ourselves regarding where we live, who's representing us where we live, who's representing my children, who represents those children in juvenile justice, because that's a whole nother conversation. And so I don't know, Keynon, it seems like the first step is listen in, weigh in, and get informed. But Keynon, I don't know too many places other than your show, I'm not trying to be biased here, where they can get informed about these kinds of things, really.
Well, Coach, we talk about this all the time, and I'm so grateful that Nikki is bringing all the statistical information and the facts that she has brought, for our listeners. But we talk about this all the time, and both of you guys have said it. You know, first of all, you have to educate yourself, and you have to get involved and know what's going on, not only in your communities and your neighborhood, but what's going on throughout your city. And this is the thing, you know, when I'm listening to you guys talk, you know, I was listening to my mom, actually, give her a little credit, but then I was listening to, you know, a couple of other politicians who were talking about, we come out to vote, and I'm talking about African Americans, we come out to vote when it's the big election, when it's talking about the president and stuff like that, but we don't vote in the small elections, you know, the senators or the, you know, the county commissioners. We don't vote when, we don't vote in none of that. And so what happens and what's going on is this, and just like I tell all my youth in my programs, there are patterns that are being targeted and watched. You know, like, for example, they just didn't make it where they put the sugary cereals on the aisle where, you know, the kids can see it. That's a strategy behind that. It's like studies have gone into that to say, you know what, if we put this on this aisle, the kids will see it, they'll bug their parents to death, and the parents will buy it. The same thing goes into these type of things, too. They know, and see, this is what I was listening to, this is what I heard. They were saying that primarily Republicans know that Democrats and African Americans primarily do not vote in these smaller elections. So what we can do is put a lot of Republicans in those places. We can gain the majority. We can gain this, set up voter supremacy sections in that side of town, and do this, do the third, and make it a lot harder. And it's like we're kind of like you always say, Coach, falling asleep at the wheel. So once again, you know, we have to be able to come out, vote, find out who you're voting for. You know, make sure that you get all of that information so you can make an educated vote, so you'll know who you're voting for,
but you know,
so
Keynon,
you'll know what you're getting yourself into.
I'm speaking for the common person that may be listening to the show who didn't go to a HBCU or might have graduated from a state college or whatever the case may be with fine degrees and all that. Still, I will admit, as the common person, common citizen, the whole process is intimidating. And this is why we're talking about it, because we want to make it less intimidating. We want people to know that, listen, I don't know everything. Keynon doesn't know everything. And, of course, Miss Nikki, but when we put what Miss Nikki knows with what Mr. Keynon knows, with what Mr. Sillette knows, with what Miss Lake knows, with what this one knows, with what this book talks about, and what this, then we begin to form, begin to fill the pieces, fill the puzzle with the missing pieces. And here's what we got to stop doing, I think, and I'm guilty of this. I've been guilty of this in my youth, because I went in the booth. You don't even want to know what I did when I went in the booth, but I'm going to just tell it because somebody else done did it. I went in the booth when I was younger because I didn't know about the different people on the ballot. But I voted Democratic straight down the ticket because I was a Democratic voter. But what I'm saying to you, it's a little intimidating for people first to get to the polls. And then there's intimidating for them to know, well, who is this on the ballot? And so what I'm saying to you guys is maybe part of the infant steps might be to at least write down your questions. When are the elections? And to ask, well, who's running? And then we got the computer age now, internet, Google those names. But it's still a bit intimidating because we don't make it a practice. And that's why we're talking about it. We got to make it a practice of being informed that when we do not vote, as you've said oftentimes, Keynon, when we do not put our 2 cents in the pot, we can't complain about the 2 cents they won't let us spend, okay? Exactly. This is a great way to understand recidivism, though, from the inside out, instead of always talking about it from the inside in, outside in.
Can I just also add to that, when you were talking about making sure we educate ourselves and especially our communities, it's very important that you talk about making sure we understand who the candidates are, because a lot of our work as an organization has been focused on rural areas in North Carolina where they elect non-minority leaders who do not hold their best interests at heart. And for year after year, they continue to vote against the needs of the people. And one of the things that we work to do is to arm them with education that they need so that they can be an informed voter whenever it is time for them to cast their vote. Now, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We do not endorse any candidates. However, we can provide information, and that is one thing that we have really worked over the last 2 to 3 years to, especially in these rural areas where they just continue to vote the same way every single time, because this is the way they've always done it, and they know this individual because they've grown up in their community, and this person is not voting on anything to actually help them.
You know, it is widely said, Keynon, that, you know, I'm borrowing this for the hip hop, using them as an example, the hip hop movement. The hip hop movement want to get paid, but folks in the rural communities want power. They're looking 3 and 4 and 5 generations down the line. I mean, you know, if you can combine the two, then you got the best of both worlds. But I mean, everybody just simply wants to get paid and have the tennis shoes and have the music and the girlfriend, the boyfriend, the cars and all that. While people in the rural communities are teaching their kids, if we could just divert for a minute, listen, you're going to hold this office because the family been holding it for the last 2 or 4,
That's right.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
That's right.
You see them elections.
And you see that dad was a former senator or former congressman, and then the son comes and he is a senator or a representative, and then he or she will aspire to a higher office, whether it be any of the council of state positions. But that's exactly what happens in those rural areas. You have the minority community that says, "Hey, listen, they own a local store in my community. I shop at their store. Of course, this is a great person, but they may be great people, but they're not making great decisions whenever it comes to your family, whenever it comes to your economic viability. They're not making good choices when it comes to you and what happens in your community."
And it has been proven.
And that's the thing. And that's the thing that I think we have to teach our listeners, our youth. You know, in my situation, in my case, the families and parents that I work with, you know, it's like you guys both said, you know, it's like we think about how can we make a quick buck or how can we make a living, how can we make our money today, when you're absolutely right. It's the true power is when you can affect and change the quality of life.
That's right.
Yep. And it's when you're like you said it exactly right, Nikki. When you're changing policies which affect everyday outcomes about, you know, how much gas is going to cost, or how much this is going to do, or how we're going to get these laws changed in your neighborhood, or your city, or your town, your state. That's where it really affects us at, and we don't see that. You know, we look at it like, you know, Obama is the biggest and the best thing, and if we vote for him, and you know, or you know, we vote for the president, then that's going to change. And it's like, no, he can only do so much. The ones who you need to vote for are the ones who are in your city, your state, and those are the ones who are going to really affect you more so than not.
Well, Keynon, you work right there in Buncombe County. Just break it down to them. First, you got the federal government, the federal level. You got the state level. Then you have the local level, and then you have the you know, from where I'm from, you got the county level. Counties are very powerful around here. Okay. And so folks need to understand that the separation of powers may all have the same goal, and that is for those same rural people to continue to run for office and hold those offices. But I wanted to ask, first I want to give a compliment to Keynon. I was looking at the film from 2 of the young men that spoke, Keynon, about your program. First of all, let me just compliment you. Those guys, I think the one guy says, I'm almost moved to tears. I think the one guy said that. And the 2 of them, they really articulated. I mean, they were articulate in speaking about what my daddy taught me that. And so I think, Keynon, the first rule of thumb is always to change paradigms, to change mindsets, to condition the mental aspect of young boys as they emerge and as they develop. But I think for those that are listening that may be adults, because I'm assuming this program is, according to demographics, is listened to by the adults, they have to be aware that their children now are subject to the master plan, politically, economically, socially, educationally, and they have to say, I have to invest in something regarding my children, so let me at least start by being informed. So when I mosey on down to the polls, by bus, by walking, by ride share, I can at least put 2 cents in like the widow's mite in the Bible and be proud that my 2 cents matter because I at least was informed and practiced what I was informed about.
That's exactly right.
Them boys,
that's exactly right.
Them boys was good, Keynon. You'll have that on the thing there, but they spoke very intelligently about the program, so I was really proud. It was kind of a shock to be honest with you. It really, really was.
Wow. You know, kind of piggybacking off what you said, Coach, you know, one thing that, you know, when you're talking about changing mindsets, you know, real quick, to all my listeners, to all my parents, you know, I that's what I do. I'm a social worker by trade, you know, child protective service. I have a nonprofit organization working with young men, and that's the main thing that I want to do, is be able to change the mindsets of these young men, to be able to give them something more to aspire to than the norm, be able to uplift and educate our people. And so with that, you know, I get a lot of times, you know, why don't you work with the parents? You know, why don't you do this and this? And to be honest, when I first started the program, I had a parent component where I did a parent conference with the parents and talked about the youth, and then it kind of just fell to the wayside because the parents didn't really participate or show much interest in it. So my mindset, and you know, and we talked about this before, Coach, you know, anything that I do with these young men can instantly be undone the moment they walk back into the home. That's the true reality. The true reality, you know, I can tell them everything great under the sun, but the true reality begins when they walk back in the home with their parents or their guardians or care providers. I'm aware of that. I'm also aware that I cannot change a grown person's mind frame, or, you know, I can give them insight as well, but I would rather work with the younger folks to be able to, who are still moldable and kind of can mend and break down those walls and barriers. So with that, that's why I do what I do. The reason I said that is this, Coach, and this is something that Nikki stated earlier. You know, we have to not only educate ourselves, our youth, but we have to be able to change. And what I mean by change is something that was focused on and talked about in this entire show, which is being able to educate ourselves when we're going to, whether it be going to the polls, whether it be just educating and informing ourselves about what's going on in our communities, what's happening with our kids, instead of, and what I like to say is, do the same old or the same old thing. And what I'm trying to get at is this. I got a call from a parent a couple of weeks ago where she was saying that she found out that her 14-year-old son was smoking marijuana. So, you know, my mind frame was, okay, you know, let me have a talk with them. But then it dawned on me, this is the same mom who I know for a fact smokes marijuana, and she does it in front of her sons and his friends. So these are the type of things what I'm talking about, you know. And the reason I mentioned Nikki's name is when she talked about going to the courthouse and being discriminated against when you dress a certain way, being targeted when you look a certain way, being targeted when you act a certain way. We not only, and this is what I want the show to be about. This is what I always strive for the Keynon Lake Show to be about. Not only do we need to put pressure on the lawmakers or make those paradigm shifts, like Coach said, by coming out, by showing up to the county commissioner meetings. You know, that was something that we talked about not too long ago, Coach, here on my show. You know, there was a county commissioner meeting, and Nikki, I'm going to say this, it was talking about, the county commissioner meeting was talking about targeting certain areas for voting. And the areas that they were targeting, what they said what they're going to do was this. They said they're going to go to certain areas in Asheville, North Carolina, and send out a letter. Okay? Once they sent out this letter, if you didn't respond to the letter, you're going to get a courtesy knock on your door. If you didn't respond to the courtesy knock on your door when it was time to vote, you wouldn't vote because you didn't. So the big to-do was, well, who's going to be responsible for sending these letters? How do you even know if the letter's going to come to your house? Secondly, who's to say that these people are going to knock on your door, and who's going to verify that? All the areas that they were talking about were African-American areas in the hood and places that most minority and African-Americans live at. No, during this county commissioners meeting, when they had this, you can count on one hand how many African-Americans showed up to this meeting.
Wow.
So with that, you know, it's like we have to be better for ourselves. We have to be able to say, okay, you know what? Yeah, we need to hold others accountable to do better by us, but we cannot do that if we're not doing our thing. And we cannot say, you know, oh, teach my son or tell this person to stop doing X, Y, Z when me as a parent, I'm doing this. So it kind of all lines up when it, you know, and sorry to get off on that tangent, but I wanted to be able to get that point out.
I think it was very important that you brought that up. And I'm really glad that you talked about the county commissioners and you guys are really talking about voting, because there's an old saying that says all politics is local. And it's true, because what takes place at the state level, it comes from the local level. I mean, there was a bill that was introduced in the legislature last year that wanted to target, and I believe it was Asheville, as a matter of fact, the topless women. Apparently, there was a problem with topless women in Asheville, and so there was legislation that was introduced in the legislature about addressing this issue. And a lot of people were like, of all the things that are happening across our state, especially with health care, especially with education, you know, our teachers and law enforcement officers and state employees have not received raises and, you know, God knows when, but yet we have time to introduce legislation like this. And so on top of that, you know, it was also kind of insulting that you completely rearrange, or I guess you would say, use that word, how we vote. You know, and I believe it was Asheville again, where they moved precincts, especially the one that was at the university there. They moved it away from the university, you know, which made it a lot difficult for students to go and vote. So these are the kind of things that are happening, and even if this was an issue that was raised before the local Board of Elections, I'm sure the Board of Elections would not even acknowledge it, because what people don't understand, like I said, all politics is local. Those individuals that sit on the Board of Elections, they are appointed by the governor.
Yeah, by the guy. I was just thinking that. You just read my mind.
They are appointed by the governor.
Don't even get me on. Don't even get me on the governor.
I know.
Don't even get me on
that. I'm tangent myself, but I also have to say that we are nonprofit and we are nonpartisan as well. But people have to start making these connections, because if they don't, we're going to continue to see racial bias and racial discrimination. We're going to continue to see inequality and everything else that can be of any type of negative factor to our communities. And so we have to become more involved, and like you said, we have to educate ourselves, and we cannot be afraid, and we cannot allow the things that we don't understand to intimidate us.
Right.
So that's why we have to arm ourselves with knowledge, and that is one of the reasons why we work so hard at the Carolina Justice Policy Center to really get this message out there about the importance of jury diversity. And that's really what this boils down to, because we have a lot of people that say that we don't want to see people punished, that, you know, this effort is being soft on crime. But I'm telling you, I know how important it is to have a criminal justice system that works.
Well, I think what you're saying, Nikki, is that at the end of the day, for those parents that may be listening, we could have all these bumpers or speed bumps to slow down the possibility of a child being incarcerated, but we know that the statistics point that the high-risk children are more likely for a number of reasons. And I think what I hear you saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we might have a bump in the road called intervention. Then we have another bump in the road called prevention. Then we have some other bumps in the road where we come in from the mentoring and from the spirituality and from the recreation, leisure recreation. I want to say a leisure therapeutic session, all of that. But then I think what I hear Miss Nikki saying is that once they enter that courtroom, if they don't have a balanced jury,
that's right,
all of it is thwarted, because now they are convicted by someone who has absolutely no clue or don't even care about the dynamics from which this person evolved.
Right. That's it. That's it. And, you know, I also want to commend Keynon for the work that he's doing, because there are efforts by our state, I guess you would say, in some instances where we see the problem that's happening in our African American community, and we're seeing the higher incarceration rates. And what's happening is there is an attempt to do window dressing. So instead of really addressing the problem, we'll throw a couple of dollars at it, but we really, really don't make an effort to change it. And so whenever election time rolls around, we have these very same people, and I'll give you an example, that would say, you know what, we have lowered our prison population. Our prison population has decreased in North Carolina. No, it has not decreased. What has happened is our state said, what we're going to do is we're going to move the misdemeanors, those nonviolent offenders, as Keynon talked about earlier, and those who have maybe 6 months left on their sentences, we're going to move them from the prisons to the jails. And the jails are run by the county. So now they're saying, look, we're saving your tax dollars. No, you just shifted my tax dollars. So this is that window dressing. You know what I'm saying? This is that window dressing that we're seeing, and they're saying that they're doing a good thing for us, but they're not.
Yeah.
They haven't saved us any money. And that is what I'm talking about when I say we really, really have to connect the dots, and we have to understand what's happening in our communities, and we have to understand what's happening with our legislatures, and we have to get involved. And I think, Coach, you said it so eloquently. You know, we can no longer be intimidated.
Mm-hmm.
We have to arm ourselves with knowledge.
Well, Keynon, I'm thinking about your boys right now, and I tell you, I wish we would have given them all a chance to speak, because sometimes, I walked away from the camera to give them some privacy to be able to, you know what I'm saying, do what they do. But Keynon, let me tell you something. First thing they said is when you come to the Keynon Lake program, you never leave hungry. So we got primary needs being covered. You know what I mean? And then secondary, I think the boys feel a sense, which is important for boys in general. It doesn't have to be just African-American boys, but boys in general. They feel that sense of camaraderie. In other words, if you were a gang leader, Keynon, and you said, hey, let's go, rob, steal, kill, they'd be down with you. So because you're for the right thing, they see you as family. When they say family in the street, that means something a little heavier than just, you know what I mean? When you hear teenagers say, that's my family, it means something, you know what I'm saying? So I was very moved to know that, listen, I know that we got a lot of problems in our community. And here's another thing that I think African-Americans may not take into consideration. We have a race that is rich with intelligence of all kinds. And we have to stop being lazy regarding our variety of intelligences. We are highly intelligent. And the reason why I say that is when I hear those kids speak on that tape, and when I work with my first graders, second graders, third graders, I'm telling you, I see intelligence peaking anywhere I turn in the African-American community. What I don't see on a lot of levels is facilitation of these intelligences and guiding them and feeding them to ensure that they understand that there is, as you said, Keynon, there's a master plan to, in general, by default, divert black people into a big old hole. If you understand some of the issues, even as a first grader, second grader, third grader, even as a 10th grader, 11th grader, 12th grader, then perhaps at least you'll be able to have at least another role to take. So, Keynon, you're doing something there to shift the minds, and I think that may be, I know they're going back home to, my goodness gracious, but Keynon, they spoke highly of the program.
Well, Coach, I greatly appreciate that, and I'm glad you were finally able to get up and see, a little bit about, what the program, involves and what it engulfs, but the thing is, and I'm so glad you said this, I'm so glad that Nikki has weighed in on this as well. Again, I'm not blaming anybody because I know that the circumstances of, and this is the thing, and I was listening, I don't know if you guys know this, but you might want to get, there's a guy named Tim Wise. He's from North Carolina, from Tennessee, but he's a national speaker on racism as well. Mm-hmm. White guy. He actually wrote a book called White Like Me. Mm-hmm. And he actually came up here a couple of weeks ago talking about statistics and stuff about on racism and how, there's so much racism still, primarily in the job setting and all this kind of stuff. He did a masterful job. But I want everyone who listens to the show to understand that it's not just about blaming someone. It's not about saying, okay, you know what, the system's not fair and we're not getting a fair shot, and they're discriminating against me because I'm black or because I'm Latino or because I'm, a minority here in America. Well, yeah, that's probably true in certain situations, and it's been that way for a very, very long time. But what we're saying here today, with Nikki, Nikki, like Coach said, if I'm not saying this right, you please correct me. But what Nikki's saying, what Coach is saying, and what I've always said is this: these systems exist. Okay, I want to let you know that right now. These systems exist. They're there. But until you make up your mind to do something, okay, whether that means you voice your opinion, that means you get out and you help others, you do something to stress or to make a difference, besides sitting around complaining, then it's going to always be the same. Not only by educating yourself, but maybe being able to inform others, being able to, until you do that, then these systems are going to pretty much always be there. They're going to continue to thrive. And it's going to continue to get worse. Mm-hmm. We can't sit back and say, well, this is the garbage that I've been fed, so I'm gonna eat it. But you can't do that. You got to take a stand and stand up against it. And we can't say this, and I'm gonna say this for the last time. We can't be parents, care providers, teachers. We can't pretend to lead. And if you have children, we can't say, okay, I'm gonna lead my children this way, or I'm gonna leave the raising of my children to the teachers. Or you have to be a parent, educate your children as well, and stop playing around with that. I see so much in my everyday work where we have so many, parents who are doing wonderful things. We have parents who are doing great jobs, but we have a lot of parents who are not doing so great jobs, and these kids are really suffering for it.
Hey, Keynon, we're going to take a small break. We'll come back and wrap things up, man. This is a great conversation. That young lady that you got on the other end of that phone right there is a danger right there. She can make some change right there. Hey, this is the Keynon Lake Show, y'all. It's hot in the kitchen. We'll be right back after this. GPW. That's right. The Select USA TV Collabo Media Groups and Partners Worldwide for a limited time has opened up its membership to the general public. Now you can collaborate worldwide with media conglomerate SIBN Television and Radio. If you want to join free of charge for this limited time offer, then visit www.WeSupportSelectUSATV.com. That's right, we have programs, benefits, service, and so much more to offer to our members exclusively at SCGPW. That's right, visit www.WeSupportSelectUSATV.com. That's www.WeSupportSaletTVUSATV.com.
This is SIBN Radio, and you have just tuned in to the Keynon Lake Show. I'm your host, Keynon Lake. I am a published author, book My Daddy Taught Me That, a public speaker, and the president of a men's development youth program. The purpose of this show is to create awareness on topics that are dear to my heart, primarily absent fathers, male role models in the home, youth and young adults and children, families, and neglect and abuse. I not only want to shine a light on these topics and create awareness on these topics, I want to educate, inform, encourage, and motivate. So please join us on the Keynon Lake Show. For more information about the Keynon Lake Show, give us a call at 415-967-2346. And we thank you for listening to SIBN Radio.
Well, we're right back here wrapping things up, talking about racism today. Kudos to the NBA commissioner who handed down what seems to be a sentence. I don't know how fair it could be in the eyes of a billionaire, but, just stood up for not only the other owners who seem to have a general consensus and the players, but Keynon, I know you want to just give a two-bit on that. I know you do.
I do, Coach. We're talking about racism. We're talking about systematic structure changes and how it affects race and stuff like that on the day's show. But, and I'm glad you mentioned this, Coach. Racism is everywhere. We all look up to NBA players. We all know the type of money that they make. Even in entities such as the NBA in the sports arena, you find racism and discrimination. Folks, I want the folks listening to this show to understand that we can't just sit back and say, okay, you know what? Once again, they fed it to me, I'm going to eat it. You have to take a stand, and primarily and hopefully you're taking a stand to help any injustices going on out there. I think that the commissioner did a wonderful job in the decision that he did, Coach. I think that, he did all he could do. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the best things about the decision was that he put the onus on the owners, the other owners across the NBA to say, you know what, this is all the NBA is allowed to do, but we want more to happen, so we're leaving it in your hands to make that happen. By doing that, I think that it allows the owners to say, okay, the eye of the public is on you. The country's looking at you now, and if you don't, it could really affect your business. If these owners come back and say, we're not going to really make him sell his team, we're going to allow him to continue to be in the NBA, I think that will really hurt the NBA, and it will cause, a lot of dollars to be these pockets. That's the only way you can really feel it. When you, like you said, you know, in the eyes of a billionaire, the only way they're going to ever feel it is if it's hurting their pockets, you know.
Okay.
And that's pretty hard to do when you're dealing with that kind of money.
Hey, we got a minute left. Miss Nikki, I know that Keynon want to give the last word regarding you, but you are always welcome on the Keynon Lake Show. You are highly informed. You are, my goodness, you are the cream of the crop. Keynon, you can go ahead and bow down now and give her the scepter. Give her the scepter.
That's right. Nikki, if you have any last words, please feel free to say it real quick.
You got 20 seconds.
I just want to say that you can go to our website, www.justicepolicycenter.org. Shoot me an email. We do free presentations in the community. Call me anytime. Give me about 48 hours notice, and I'll be there.
All right,
Wonderful.
Keynon. It's another great show, man.
Well, thank you. Thank you for our guests, and we're wrapping this one up. Thank you for listening to the Keynon Lake Show.
Don't forget to follow on Twitter, give them that, the Facebook, and the phone number one more time, Keynon.
Follow me on Twitter at The KL Show, Facebook, Keynon Lake on SIBN Radio, or just Keynon Lake. And finally, the phone number is 828-582-2261. Finally, the website, www.mydaddytaughtmethat.com.
Thank you so much, guys. You guys stand by.
Thank you for joining us today for the Keynon Lake Show. We know you will be empowered as you consider the content shared by Mr. Keynon Lake, co-host Marcus Select, and our guests. For more information about Mr. Keynon Lake, please visit www.mydaddytaughtmethat, and feel free to email us at lake@mydaddytaughtmethat.com. Books can be ordered from Mr. Lake by calling 828-582-2261. Until next time, you've been listening to the Keynon Lake Show on SIBN Radio.